he wants to create a parallel or substitute the United Nations, which is the most important institution in the world for humanity. The United Nations has a charter, article one of which says that peace shall be established by peaceful means. Everybody is violating it. Everybody is a criminal. They're all signed that peace shall be done, created by peaceful means. People don't know this, but that's what it says. And only in chapter 7 of the charter can you use weapons under the leadership of the United Nations, not the US, not a coalition of willings or anything like that. We have left international law long ago. So he wants to set up something else. And, it's not tied to Gaza. If I remember correctly, the text does not mention Gaza. Now, when journalists call that peace, it's because they don't know anything about peace. They don't even problematize it. So, I've seen this for decades. People talk about peace without knowing it. Anybody is an expert on peace.
Hey everyone, my name is Anthony Fatsis and welcome to another episode of the WTFinance podcast. On this episode, I have the pleasure of welcoming back Dr. Jan Oberg. So Jan is a sociologist, peace researcher, and the director of Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research. So Jan, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
That's my pleasure. Me again.
Yeah. No, I really enjoy the conversations. They seem to have resonated with our audience. But where I like to start is very broad and maybe looking back to 2025. So if you look back at 2025, how would you review the year from your perspective?
Well, that has been a very problematic year, of course. And it has been a year with a lot of, let's say, people feeling that they don't know where they are, where the world is going. And it has been a year in which there's been a lot of threats, particularly from the fact that Donald Trump was elected and took over America and is building a personal Occidental empire. And let's say breaking all the norms and the international laws that we have built so meticulously over the last 100 years. It was a very destructive year. But having said that, let's not stare ourselves blind on what happened in the Western world, because that's only 11-12% of humanity. The rest of the world was doing quite well. Russia became the third largest economy. I remember where it was, 35, 40 years ago when you visited Moscow, there was nothing on the shelves. And the system was falling apart in the old Soviet Union. And now it seems to be, I've not been there recently, a shining development in spite of the war. And you have China rising and taking a lot of important initiatives. You have an India and China, Russia, Iran cooperation. You have the BRICS, you have the Belt and Road Initiative with 140 plus countries participating. So there are all reasons not just to be negative or being pessimistic, there are all reasons to also be optimistic, to look at positive developments. I used to tell people, open a Western media, New York Times or CNN, whatever, BBC, or your local newspaper. It will be full of negative news and negative energy. And turn people off from primetime television saying there's very little I can do here because the world is falling apart. Then you go to Chinese media, you consult China Daily, you go to CGTN, you go to other media, of course, somewhere else, outside the West, and it will be full of projects, be full of telling people, their users, their watchers, their readers, that things are going well, that gross national product was growing again, that we sold more than we did before or more than we had targeted. And we are building new bridges, we're doing new infrastructure, we have a vibrant cultural life, etc. And then you get back to your Western media and you look at what Trump is saying. It's a very interesting world we're living in. That's all I can say. I hope the West will go down with a whimper and not with a bang, but it is going down. And the new world that comes after the US empire and NATO has fallen apart will be a fabulous world for us all. That's why I keep on working, because I believe in a better future.
Yeah, really interesting. So, as you said, there's been a lot happening this year and last year. We've obviously seen a bang to the start of the year with the Venezuelan president being sort of taken back to the US. We're obviously seeing an armada going to Iran, potentially threatening them with conflict if they sort of fire against the protests. At least that seems to be what's being said. So it does seem like there's a shifting world, and it seems like the US is potentially, taking out some of China's allies. How are you looking at this whole scenario?
I think it's catastrophic for the West. I've never been anti-American. I think America has given the world a lot of good things also, apart from interventionism, militarism, bases, NATO, which I'm thoroughly against because it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, namely peace and stability and security. But at this moment, if you look at the account at the bottom line, America is the most dangerous country. Not America, sorry, but the United States of America, or as I call it, the United States of autarky, is the most dangerous actor in the international system. The threat is not Russia to Europe. The threat is not China. It's not Iran. It's not North Korea. The threat to humanity today is Trump's regime, the way to do arrogant, selfish, I grab whatever I want because I need it and I don't care about norms, civilized behavior, politeness, international law, diplomacy, or anything else. I think I want Greenland, right? This is not the way. This is not a way of signaling strength. It's a way of signaling that we're falling apart. And that is very tragic. The West is an important player in the international community, in the world. And isolating yourself with all this militarism, the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer. There's nothing else. There is nothing else. Is very tragic for the West. And what I find even more tragic is that the European Union, 420, 30 million people, are run by such visionless and submissive leaders that the only thing they can do is to go to Washington and sit around the emperor and say, oh, we didn't mean it that way. We want to have a good relationship, like the corporate chiefs are sitting around his table and listening to what he says. We should, in good friendship with the United States and the American people, we should simply begin to say enough is enough. If you keep on behaving this way, we will use nonviolent diplomatic means. And I say nonviolent diplomatic means. Of course, you cannot fight the United States with military means in Europe. But if he keeps on grabbing territories and ignoring, even threatening allies like Denmark and Greenland, which is unheard of, even I, with some imagination, had not seen that coming, not before 2019 when he said it. We are still submissively, is saying perhaps we can find a modus vivendi with this man. Let's have talks with this man. Let's have a good relationship. But we need NATO. We need American protection in Europe. All this is wrong. If Europe stood up and used non-violent diplomatic means, we could tell the Americans that we love you, but this is not the way we can accept. And here I'm thinking of saying to the Americans, we boycott all your products as consumers. 450 million people in Europe will stop buying your stuff and services. We're now going to Amazon.com. We're boycotting Google and Facebook and all that. You say to the Americans, you cannot land with your planes, passenger planes or transport planes anymore in Europe. We want your bases to go. Take out your nuclear weapons. Let's reduce the US staff at the US embassies, and we're pulling home for consultation our ambassadors. There's so many things you could do that would be easy to, install again and redo if the Americans and the Trump regime would be listening. And my simple philosophy is, if anybody can influence the American decision makers, it is their friends, formerly friends in Europe, It is not Iran. It is not China. It is not Russia. It is not Burundi. You know what I mean? If he would be able to listen to anybody but himself and the people around him, it would be that he would listen to and think twice when he sees the Americans are doing, the Europeans are doing things differently suddenly. Of course, we're not going to send troops to Greenland. Excuse me, what's going on? This is all symbol language. But we're going to say, if you grab Greenland, if you attack an allied member, the most loyal member in NATO is Denmark, if you look at the last few years. If you're going to do that, it'll have consequences. And we're already having a long list of things we will implement within 1 week if you do it. That would be diplomacy. That would be peace policy. That would be nonviolent action, because you can't fight the United States by military means. That's obvious to me. So long story short, we have all the power, and yet I tell you why. If you use nonviolent means in international politics, you will change the agenda. Because there's one thing the Americans do not understand, and the leadership America at the moment does not understand, that is nonviolent techniques, nonviolent philosophy, and setting the agenda. At the moment, the whole world is lying flat down. All the media, all the geopolitical commentators, all the, public discussions on Substack, etc., is about the United States. Mr. Trump is setting the global agenda. Excuse me, I think it's time that somebody else contributes to that agenda. I'm not saying we shouldn't listen to the Americans and what they want and how they think. Of course we should. That's first rule of any nonviolent struggle, is know your opponent, know your friends, know yourself, and you will win all the battles. But the fact is that the rest of the West, such as Europe, has been so blind to the wrongdoings for decades of the United States, all its wars. We have supported them in Europe. We've sacrificed soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq, Syria, everywhere, Libya. We have called it the leadership of the free world and a democratic country and all that. All the ministries of foreign affairs in Europe are totally blinded, totally unable to see what the rest of us have been saying for years. America has an other side that you should be careful about. Be careful, because you are participating in the most militarist war-fighting country since 1945. And they never listened. I'm a Danish citizen. I know they don't listen in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I sit in Sweden. I know they don't listen. They listened in the 80s when I was a consultant for both. But they don't listen anymore. This group think that everything America does is good. And now they cannot find anywhere to go in the world, because their intellectual, their worldviews is shattered completely by Mr. Trump. And I tell you, if we don't stop him, he is running very fast. In spite of being 79, he's running very fast. And you have to stop the man before he becomes a fascist state that begins to take more countries, more resources, and set the agenda even more. That's my view.
Yeah, as you say, it is scary to see what's happened. And I guess, one thing that he has done, and, as you said, I'm sure a lot of people disagree with it. He has actually gotten what he wants in terms of the Europe remilitarizing, Europe sending more, as you said, sending more troops to Greenland. Basically, everything that he's pushing for, it seems like there's a means to an end. So maybe he goes extreme and says he wants to take Greenland, but it's actually he just wants sort of NATO to put more troops into Greenland. So it does seem like he's, as you said, he's getting what he wants, which may not be a good thing in certain ways.
He's a good player. He knows how to get, he starts out with the maximum, I want Greenland. Maybe he doesn't get all of Greenland, but he gets what he wants in Greenland, namely the resources. And I find it appalling that the Danish government did not have a plan, but was staring themselves blind every day on Ukraine and Russia. They did not have a plan. What do we do if, one, Trump is re-elected? Because he said this in 2019 to the Danish government in Copenhagen. And secondly, if he raises the issue of Greenland once again, what is our response? You know, when he did it last winter, and he had taken over, he said, I think I want Greenland. It was like looking at school children, not knowing what to say at their press conferences. They had no idea about, because they had hoped that he would not raise it again, I suppose. Or they didn't have the imagination in the Danish Foreign Policy Administration and the Ministry of the Department of the Prime Minister. They did not have the fantasy to believe that he would do it again. Some of us said he will. And, you know, it is very easy to predict that he would do Greenland in his second term, because the Biden administration forced through, again to submissive people in Europe, that the United States should have 43, I said 43 new bilaterally agreed American bases in Scandinavia. It is 17 in Sweden. It is 15 in Finland. It is 7, 8, depending on how I define it, as far as I understand, in Norway, and it's 3 in Denmark. Now, what is the long-term purposes of militarizing a low-tension area like Scandinavia, where we always had the Nordic balance and spoke with each other, and where we had different solutions, Swedish neutrality, Finland with a special relationship with Russia, Soviet Union at the time, Norway and Denmark as limited members of NATO. That worked so well. Now, the people who had no analytical capacity in Sweden and Finland first made these two countries catastrophically members of NATO. And secondly, behind the backs of the people. No public discussion worth mentioning, no referendum, nothing. We were told that our defense minister had gone to Washington and signed a binding 10-year agreement about, in Sweden's case, 17 American bases, all under US jurisdiction, way outside the bases too. So my question is, how do these people think today? They did not understand that Trump could come back with a fascist-like attitude to the world and expansion, repression inside, and grabbing what I want outside by military means. How do these people think today that if there is a war, he can introduce whatever weaponry, including nuclear weapons in the Nordic countries? Now, the low tension area that was left to destroy was Greenland. Which also has the resources, as we know, and the thing that goes through everything Trump does, and you can see his last, I think on February 4, the meeting about rare earths and minerals around the world. It's all about resources. It's about, and that's why I call it the United States of autarky. The United States shall be able to survive when the world is turning its back to it and doing other things without the West, to survive by grabbing, by controlling, by holding resources outside Gaza, in the depths of Ukraine, in Canada, in Greenland, and in Venezuela. You know, look for resources and you have a key to what he will do next. It's all about either military or politically securing resources for the day. Nobody wants to have to do with him. Nobody wants or have to fight him. So the long story short is, this is damn dangerous. People are obsessed about talking about his personality. I'm not a psychologist. I don't care whether he's a narcissist or something else. What I'm caring about is, if you let the Trump regime continue, the world will be a very nasty place in the long run. 3 more years of Trump, and I don't even want to think of it. So that's why nonviolent resistance, and our foundation is publishing 5 portfolios with ideas these days, with ideas on what citizens and governments around the world can do to stop, in friendship, nothing provocatively, something that can be taken away and redone if they begin to behave themselves. That's the smart thing. But there's no single Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Europe who is thinking that way. That's mind-boggling to me. And that has to do with a couple of things I'd just like to say. We have become far too obsessed with security, meaning weapons. It doesn't. We've been far too obsessed with discussing the present and the past, and nobody talks about the future. And you have all these geopolitical experts sitting talking about military issues and peace in Ukraine without knowing what peace is. And we never talk about solutions. The West has given up talking about possible things to do. If you do these kinds of things that we do as a Peace Research Institute, you're considered unrealistic or naive or idealistic. And I'm not even going to say, and what about you guys who believe in warfare and weapons and whose mind, even if you're against all of it, your mind is polluted by weapons thinking. What kind of solutions do you have? And I don't know, I don't see anybody talking about solutions, not research, not politicians, and not media. If you ask a European leader today, be it Macron or Mette Frederiksen or Merz, what do you want Europe or your own country to look like in 20 years from now? You will get nothing worth discussing. That is catastrophic for anyone. If you go to China, they know where they want to be in 20 years from now. Without a future vision, you cannot realize a better world. That is our essential, I would say, the most important problem. And then this militarized mindset that even people who want alternatives cannot think beyond weapons. Their geopolitical military views are what comes through. They don't know anything about peace. The whole world is peace illiterate. Nobody's trained in it. No prime minister or leader has any advisors who knows anything about peace, nonviolence, mediation, conflict resolution, conflict analysis, and all that. I'm sick and tired of hearing media people say that what Trump does is peace. He has a peace board. He's trying to make peace in Ukraine. Excuse me, this has nothing to do with peace for those of us who are professionals in that peace, in that field. And so I suffer every day when I see people talk about peace and relate it to what Trump does.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask about that, the peace board and how you're looking at it and what it means. So, what are your perspectives on it? Is it just a geopolitical grab as well?
It is a totally bizarre thing. First of all, Mr. Trump wants to run it himself. That's very clear for the rest of his life. And then he also secures that he shall appoint his successor, which probably would be his son-in-law. It's built on the countries who want to participate in it, and then they pay $1 billion. And, you know, although it's not possible, I'm sure that what he had in mind, and he does in his paper about it, say indirectly, he wants to create a parallel or substitute the United Nations, which is the most important institution in the world for humanity. The United Nations has a charter, article one of which says that peace shall be established by peaceful means. Everybody is violating it. Everybody is a criminal. They're all signed that peace shall be done, created by peaceful means. People don't know this, but that's what it says. And only in chapter 7 of the charter can you use weapons under the leadership of the United Nations, not the US, not a coalition of willings or anything like that. We have left international law long ago. So he wants to set up something else, and you know, it's not tied to Gaza. If I remember correctly, the text does not mention Gaza. Now, when journalists call that peace, it's because they don't know anything about peace. They don't even problematize it. So, and you know, I've seen this for decades. People talk about peace without knowing it. Anybody is an expert on peace. Now, you and I don't speak about how to operate on a knee because we are not doctors. There's no respect anywhere in the world for the word or the knowledge or the concept of peace. Nobody, consultants, people who are advisors, none of them have a background in peace studies or a master's in peace, which is an academic discipline. taught at 800 universities around the world or something like that. And so I say to myself, no wonder the things are going to hell for the West, because we don't have any organization that works for peace apart from the United Nations, which has been destroyed by the Western countries systematically. Not paying, giving blurred mandates, misusing the Security Council, vetoing this and that, and totally overriding. I mean, where is the United Nations in Ukraine? Where is the United Nations in Gaza? It's not because the United Nations is a bad organization. It's because it's underfunded, understaffed, and deliberately being destroyed by member states. I'm sick and tired of people who on Substack and elsewhere say, oh, close down the United Nations, they're doing no good, and look at what they cannot do. Excuse me, did you ever study how it works? First of all, the United Nations cannot be stronger or more relevant than the members want to make it. If the members want to destroy it, you just ignore the charters and the norms, and you misuse the organization. That was stated very clearly by the first Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Trygve Lie from Norway, who said it can never be stronger than the members want it to be. Secondly, it's underfunded. Most people do not know that the members of the member states pay 1% to everything the United Nations does. 1% of what they spend on armament. Now, do you expect the UN to be able to create peace around the world, to have peacekeeping troops, to do negotiations and mediation, have visions about how you push parties in the direction of a peaceful coexistence, etc.? Can that be done with 1% of the military budgets that the same member states have? You know, before you criticize the UN, and it needs reform and it needs to be criticized, yes. Before you do that, ask, what does my country do to realize the dream the United Nations is built on, namely no more war? Peace by peaceful means. Does Britain, where you sit, do it? Answer no. Does Sweden, where I sit, do it? Answer no. Does China do it? Russia do it? Iran do it? No. With this setup and those policies and nobody discussing it, of course, there cannot be peace in the world. Those perverse proportions, 1% for the peaceful organization, the UN, the most important, as I said, the most Gandhian document governments have ever signed. With that status, there cannot be a peaceful world. And secondly, most countries, many countries, 40, 50 of them do not pay or do not pay in time. So Guterres, the Secretary General, has just announced that by June or July, basically, the United Nations may not be able to pay its staff anymore. Does it hit the front lines, front pages? Humanity's most important organization is being staffed by its members. Now, you see, we've got a few things to think of instead of listening to what Mr. Trump wrote last night on Truth Social. There are more important things in the world than Mr. Trump.
Yeah, great points. How do you see, what is a realistic mechanism to peace? I think you said at the start we should talk about the future. So how would you, I guess, shape that future so we can get to that ideology or that goal?
Oh, you mean the better world?
Yeah, the better world.
Well, if we don't think about the better world, it won't happen. That's what I'm saying. If you don't think of your future health, you won't be healthy. If you don't think where to go in your car, but only look at the rear mirror, you are going to end up in the ditch. And that's what the world is, at least the Western world. Well, let me tell you, first of all, since our biggest problem is global militarism and this perverse mentality that we get what we want with weapons, and that weapons can create peace and security and stability, the mantra of NATO, which is a totally failed organization, I would start out saying, what should the future security system look like? How should the world countries, as long as we are countries, how should they defend themselves, but in a way that does not lead to arms races and warfare? And it's extremely simple. Just scrap the idea of offensive defense. Scrap the idea of deterrence. The whole philosophy underlying what every country does in the world. I'm surprised that even countries with completely different cultures are kind of adapting to the fundamentals of the Western strategic thinking, which is based on deterrence. Deterrence means I can kill you on the other side of the globe with my long-range, very destructive weapons, including nuclear weapons, if you don't do what I say, or if you do something I don't like. But of course, I don't have that intention. I have only peaceful intention, but I'm able to kill you if you do something that I don't like or don't obey orders. Now it's a little bit like putting up a pistol against your head, Anthony, and say, no, Anthony, shall we talk? That can never create peace and stability and security and disarmament. It simply cannot, because those your weapons point to will feel threatened, even if you say and mean it that I have no intentions. This mismatch between capability and intentions is humanity's biggest problem, and nobody's talking about it. The solution to this is very simple: short-range weapons, extremely strong self-defense, militarily and civilian, but not the ability to kill people elsewhere. If everybody had self-defense, which is Article 51 in the UN Charter, the world would be a balancing, stable place. It is this constant interventionism. America has 800 bases around the world and they call themselves peaceful. Excuse me. Have we stopped thinking? Why does the CIA and the American military want to be in 130 countries with 800 military bases? If it's not to dominate and provoke and fight wars, it cannot be self-defense. And if I should give you an image, imagine a street of London in which every one pedestrian walking around carries a submachine gun. And imagine the same street in which everybody was trained in jiu-jitsu and self-defense. I want the last world, not the first world. The first world is the one we live in. So self-defense, defensive defense, defensive deterrence is okay, not offensive, not long range. And couple that then with the first resort, because military and violence should always be the second resort or the last resort. The first resort should be talk with each other, diplomacy, conflict analysis, conflict resolution, mediation, reconciliation, forgiveness, all these kinds of things that belong to social science that humanity ought to introduce into security politics. The long story short is, it is all doable, but because we have a military industrial media academic complex, MIMAC, it won't happen. These are elites from these military industry, media, academia, making a complex. They are a cancer burden, a cancer cells growing on civil society everywhere. People who are never making part of a democratic decision making, people who earn money from killing and producing the weapons that kill, people who are, like they congest around Epstein, they congest about warfare, and they have no idea of anything else. Unless we take that cancer cell everywhere, the military, industrial, media, academic complex in Denmark and Sweden, the United States, Russia, European countries, etc., away, begin to address that this is a problem, we cannot create a better world. I'm sorry, we cannot create the world that is embedded in the UN thinking. So, and that of course means also nuclear weapons have to go. Why? Because they are militarily useless. If you use nuclear weapons on somebody's territory that you want to take, you cannot use it afterwards. 2, they are immoral. Nobody has a right for a political purpose to kill millions of people. Nobody has that right. 3, they have proven to not create a better world. 3, there have been lots of 4, there's been lots of accidents with them. It's a miracle that you and I are sitting here talking if you have gone through the accidents that have been with nuclear weapons. 4, 5, 6, whatever. There are many arguments against nuclear weapons where we're not talking about them. They are now illegal because there's an international treaty for the abolishment of nuclear weapons. And finally, they can never be called defensive. Nobody wants to use nuclear weapons on their own territories. They want to use it on somebody else. Every country that has nuclear weapons in the East and West and North and South belong to, adhere to, support a terrorist philosophy. Namely, I have a right for a political purpose to kill millions of people. That is terrorism. And that was why it was back in time when I was young, it was called the balance of terror. That real terrorists, the real dangerous terrorists are the nuclear states, because terrorism is defined by using deliberately civilians, non-combatants, as targets of your weapons. It's like, Israel killing Palestinians in a school bus. Innocent people will be killed. You cannot use nuclear weapons without killing tons of civilians, innocent people. That's terrorism. That's not warfare, it's terrorism. That was why it was called balance of terror. But then came terrorism and 9/11, and the Americans and everybody else began to reserve the term terrorism only for, Al-Qaeda and ISIS and that type of stuff. It's the same mentality. There's no difference between a nuclear power's leadership and Al-Qaeda in terms of philosophy. Namely, we have a right to kill tons of civilians, innocent people, to achieve something we think is important. So there are only arguments against nuclear weapons. And I'm saying this a couple of days after February 4, which was the end of the new start, meaning that at this moment, there are no arms control agreements that pertain to nuclear weapons. They are being spread. More countries will like to have them because others are threatening them with theirs. And you've had a bizarre situation in which, and that's another thing that is actual just when we talk, the bizarre discussion about Iran not being allowed to have nuclear technology, while Israel was given nuclear weapons by Western countries in the 60s. Who are we to tell Iran not to have it? And why do we do that? Because it's obvious to anyone who followed this that Iran does not want to have nuclear weapons. I mean, Mr. Netanyahu began talking about the risk that in 3 months Iran would be a nuclear weapons power. He began to talk about that 35 years ago in the early 90s. Now, he's been lying about that every time he's been standing on the podium of the United Nations talking about Iran getting nuclear weapons tomorrow. Now, I've been enough to Iran and talked with enough people there to know that if they wanted to have nuclear weapons, they would have gotten that long ago. It's not that complicated to become a nuclear power, nuclear weapons power. They don't want to have it, but they want to have sovereignty over their technology. And they want to have missiles like anybody else. I'm not saying it's good, but everybody else has it. Who are we to tell Iran not to have it? We've been harassing Iran since 1953, when CIA and the British intelligence service, a funny name talking about intelligence, made the coup against Dr. Mossadegh, the first democratically elected leader of Iran. And since then, we have harassed them basically, one way or the other, including the sanctions that have made life miserable for the whole Iranian people. How is this possible without a deeper discussion about what is it the West does and has done with Iran? The defense is, oh, it's a regime of mullahs, so we don't have to take them serious. Excuse me, it's 90 million people whose life has been destroyed by the Western world. And of course, internal repression, I'm not excluding that. But if there is an internal repression in Iran, which there is, that's one cage. But around that cage, we have put up the isolation, the sanctions, the impossibility of socioeconomic development and a middle class that could change the political system. We're doing only foolish things in the West. But journalists are staring on, are there now going to be negotiations? What do we think about negotiations? They all completely forget the bigger picture and the question of justice. With what right are we telling Iranians what to do? Do the Iranians have military bases all around the US and Europe? Are the Iranians telling us how to live our lives? Are the Iranians saying that we should have a theocratic government in Europe and the US? I mean, there's so many questions I would like somebody to discuss, simply from the point of view of deeper values and ways of thinking, cosmology, if you will, and also what is justice? With what right do we tell the Iranians how to live their lives? These are things that we need to discuss instead of sitting talking about geopolitical affairs and who has military where, etc. We never get to the essential issues by this. And that's probably the purpose of it all, because Western media are serving warfare much more than peace.
Yeah, so many important messages. So Jan, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. We've covered so many. You've gone so many different directions. But my last question is, what is one message you want people to take away from our conversation?
Well, I used to say a little jokingly, peace is more intelligent than warfare. And any idiot can start a fight in a bar, but any idiot cannot stop a fight in a bar. So I always, when you ask such a question, I say, I'd like to quote George Bernard Shaw, who said, allegedly, most people look at the world as it is and ask why. But what we should do is to look at the world as it could be and ask why not. You see, if we don't deal with possible solutions, a macro perspective, and a focus also on the future and not just the present and the past, we cannot create that. What you cannot imagine, you will not work for. And that's where we all have to change, in my view. And that is why our little foundation, which, by the way, now has turned 40 years, totally independent of corporations and governments, people financed. That's why we are called a Peace and Future Research Institution. If you don't do research about the future, if you don't do scenarios, if you don't use good ideas, if you don't try to have a vision of something where people could live peacefully together, how the hell should we create it? You cannot create peace by talking about Mr. Trump or NATO or armament or Iran's weapons. You can never create peace. We're wasting our time for this. That's what I want to say to end your very kind invitation for me to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Such an important message. So really appreciate you coming on. If anyone wanted to find out more about your work and what you do, where would the best place for that be?
Well, I would start out at transnational.live. That is our flagship homepage, transnational.live. And there you will find also a link to our Substack page. And on our Substack page, you will also find our video library of collections, because we have had to copy all our videos that were on YouTube and will be on YouTube like yours over to Substack, because I personally have been excluded by Google-owned YouTube. I cannot log in. Our channel still exists, but I cannot put up new videos or post anything. I cannot comment. I cannot print like. I cannot subscribe to your channel because the Transnational Foundation has been excluded, locked out, blocked by Google. And I do my best to work without American technology in the future. And I think more people should do the same. This is outrageous that we have to fight for being on Google, YouTube to talk about peace. I've never talked about anything but peace. So thank you for that. It's transnational.live.
Okay, great. I'll put that in the description below, but thanks again for your time. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening. I really appreciate the support. If you've got value out of this, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, or comment, good or bad feedback. I'm always open to that. But it really helps with the channel. As I said before, only about 14% of people actually subscribe to this channel. So if you were to that, it would really help. It could mean we could continue to grow. If not, thanks for watching and see you on the next show. And you also might like this video right here. All right, thanks again.